Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I'm Brian Emhauser, excited to be with you here on this Thursday morning as we are marching toward a important milestone for the Seahawks. They will start their at least media attended OTA practices next Tuesday. So I'm looking forward to being in attendance next week and getting a chance to see the whole crew on the field together and see how everyone's looking and who's standing out. And one of the things that was cool, I think you probably have seen the clips by now, but if you haven't, the Seahawks made a trip to Safeco. Well, no, it's T-Mobile Park now. Sorry, I almost said Safeco Field. I still think it should be called Safeco Field. But T-Mobile Park the other day while the Mariners are on the road. And one of the things that I think is worth calling out about them making that trip is in my kind of final article summing up Mike Macdonald's first season, I talked about a lot of the things he did really well. I talked about some areas where he needed to grow. And one of them was in understanding how to kind of create a culture of where people look forward to going to work and look forward to being part of what's going on there. And there's a lot of ways to kind of manage that, but it might not be something that he's naturally like. I was never good at this as a leader, in terms of the fun stuff. I was very much about the work and had to have people on my team that were good at finding out, figuring out some fun ways to spend time. And so I think it's really cool that, instead of going and visiting a military base, which I think Mike Macdonald's, obviously has a military background in his family. It's really important. It has a lot of lessons to learn. But it's pretty serious. And they did that, I think, a few times last year. Going to seeing the team, the guys just out at a baseball field, taking batting practice, catching fly balls, joking around. I think that's growth for Mike Macdonald. I don't think we saw anything that really was like that last year. Could have been some things that we missed or I'm forgetting, but it stuck out to me that this felt like a different kind of energy than the energy we saw around the Seahawks last year. So I thought that was pretty cool and good news to see they were having a fun time. Also, some fantastic meme material. If you haven't seen the Mike Macdonald batting practice picture, it's up on my Twitter feed. You can find it there, but Mike used to be a baseball player, so a good baseball player. So he was taking it pretty seriously as he takes everything. But I think that was pretty good to see. Speaking of Mike Macdonald, there was some news that I will get to. I'm going to get to some news bits at the jump here. The bulk of the show is going to be about the Seahawks edge rush group and how important that group is, the status of that group, some of the numbers that kind of put into context where they are relative to maybe where you'd want them to be and how realistic it is for them to take those steps. So I'm going to talk about that here in just a moment. And then before I do that, I want to get into a couple bits of news. And if you haven't already given the show a like and click subscribe, please do that. Please give the show a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. That would be awesome. I would really appreciate it. And the news of yesterday was that the NFL is not going to ban the tush push. And part of why it, like, one of the things that stuck out to me about it was there was a public tweet from Adam Schefter about which guys will be voting against the tush push. And the Seahawks were not one of them. And the reason that's a surprise is that I think this is confusing to some people, but again, Adam Schefter published a list of teams that voted against banning the tush push. So basically, sorry, now I screwed it up. There was a proposal to ban the tush push. 10 teams voted against that proposal, which means they are in favor of the tush push remaining. The Seahawks were not on that list. So the Seahawks voted to ban the tush push. All right. Is that clear? The reason that that's surprising is when we talked to Mike McDonald about this just a month or two ago. Actually, we talked to John Schneider and Mike McDonald about this. John Schneider said, doesn't really necessarily have a strong perspective, but you should ask Mike McDonald, which we did. And Mike McDonald said this. He says, I think it's a good play. I understand the positions people have with the health and safety of it. The question of the matter is, if there were to be an injury, the severity of the injury that's at play. You never want to put your players in that type of risk. That's something that you have to kind of measure against any other football play that you see on a normal basis. But it seems to me there's enough plays where we feel like that isn't the case right now. So I think it's a good play, and you've got to defend it, and maybe we'll execute it someday. So Mike McDonald was very outspoken. Like, he was pretty chest out on that when he told us that. And for the Seahawks to vote to ban it is interesting. I'm curious what changed in Seattle among the team to change their vote. But it doesn't really matter right now because the tush push isn't going anywhere. It is here to stay for the foreseeable future. And I think it fell short by 2 votes to be banned. So it's pretty close. It also gives the potential for the Seahawks to utilize that play. And they have some players and guys like Jalen Milroe who could be interesting guys to utilize in that regard. So we will see. Other news, the Seahawks will have a joint practice with the Green Bay Packers before their 3rd and final preseason game. This will be in Green Bay. So a little bit unfortunate for those of us who are hoping to see a joint practice in Seattle. That's not going to happen. But the first 2 games against the Raiders and against the Chiefs, both are against teams that have coaches who are really against joint practices. Andy Reid has been outspoken against it. Pete Carroll, even as recently on his interview with Brock and Salk, is against it. So the only time the Seahawks could have a chance to have a joint practice was with the Packers in Green Bay. And Mike LaFleur has been very pro joint practices. So not a surprise that happened. The reason it's important is because the way preseason has evolved at this point is that you pretty much don't see almost any of the veteran players get snaps during preseason games. It's very light, if at all. And so the joint practices where the coaches can really control the environment are really important for getting those like close to live reps against another team. And in my mind, those are really the preseason quote games at this point. If you can have a joint practice, I think that having multiple joint practices could be ideal. I think joint practices are going to become more and more the norm as time goes on. So important for the Seahawks to get that. I'm sure Mike McDonald's happy to have that. John Schneider's probably happy to be able to have an excuse to go back home and visit Green Bay. Other bits of news, Jim Irsay passed away, the owner of the Colts. So, pretty young. I think he was 65, and it'll be interesting to see what happens with that Colts franchise. I think ownership was heavily involved in how it was run, and it could be a changing of the guard there, depending on, I haven't looked into what the succession plans are there, or the sale plans, or how that will work. But Jim Irsay, who started as a ball boy, ends his life as a owner of the Colts. And Seahawks play the Colts this year, a team that's really continuing to be in transition and looking, hoping that Anthony Richardson can turn into the quarterback they were hoping he could be when they drafted him 4th overall, I believe, a couple of years ago. Other news. I think those are the main bits of news that I've got. The Seahawks will not be part of Hard Knocks. So that's the other bit there. Seahawks will not be part of Hard Knocks. And we will, I think, for people that are just dying for Seattle to be on Hard Knocks, it's going to happen. I was talking to Dave Pearson about this last year. Teams no longer have the ability to refuse it. And so I think it's just a matter of time before the Seahawks are the ones chosen. I do kind of wonder if maybe the ownership situation could play a role in this, and that, maybe Jody Allen is, because she's not, quote, the owner, she's the proxy, or I can't remember exactly what it's called, but maybe because owners do show up a decent amount in some of these, that they're waiting. Maybe they'll wait a few years until the Seahawks eventually get a new owner. Maybe they'll wait till Dave Pearson chooses to retire, because I know he's not I think most PR people are not a fan of being on Hard Knocks and all the potential, PR nightmares that can come out of a Hard Knocks exposure. But for now, the Seahawks are not part of Hard Knocks coming up on this year. All right. I think let's get into the topic at hand, Seahawks edge rush crew. And, this is a group that Mike Macdonald, when I asked him last year, how good do you think Boye, Mafe, and Derick Hall could be? He said, I think they can be all pros. He is very high on how good that pair can be. And I think it's worth, calling out that this is a pair of, really young players. Derick Hall is 24. Boye Mafe is, 26. He is on the older side for a player just entering his third. Well, this will be his fourth season. But it's a pretty young edge rush crew in general. And obviously they added a pretty old player in DeMarcus Lawrence to it. And then they've got Uchenna Nwosu, who's kind of in the middle. But I think you can't mistake the fact that Boye Mafe and Derick Hall and their development is absolutely crucial to not only the defense, but the team overall. If you want to look at teams that excel in the playoffs, pass rush is just a huge, huge part of this. And edge rush in general tends to be a big part of it. And for those who are, back to the trolling saying that Mike Macdonald, isn't going to say anything but rave reviews about guys, has not listened to Mike Macdonald. Mike Macdonald spent most of last season talking down Tyrese Knight to keep his head on his shoulders. He spent much of his season saying, let's not get ahead of ourselves with this guy or with that. Mike Macdonald is one of the most measured and least effusive coaches I've seen about talking about his players. So it stood out to me when he said, I think these guys can be all pros. That's something that almost feels like hyperbole, and especially when it's coming from him, who is quite measured in that. And when we look at kind of like, let's just reset on how those two guys did last year. Boye Mafe started off the year really strong. He had 9 pressures in the first game against the Broncos. And you might say, whatever, the Broncos aren't that good. Well, they were a playoff team. They also had, by most measures, the best offensive line in football last year. And that was Boye Mafe's best game of the season. In fact, his best 2 games from a pass rushing perspective came in the first 2 games of the year. He had 15 pressures through 2 weeks. And if you look at how people were doing at that point, he was second in the NFL in pressures, behind only Aiden Hutchinson through 2 weeks. He was ahead of Micah Parsons by one pressure. He was one of the top graded edge defenders in the NFL. He was right up there with Max Crosby and Trey Hendrickson at that point. But then he got hurt. And his production took a pretty big dive after that. So he ended up never having more than 4 pressures in another game the rest of the year. He ended the year with 6 sacks. So he had a 9-sack year, and he went backwards. So he had this big, jump from year 1 to year 2, where he went from, I think, 3 sacks in his first year to 9 sacks in his second, and then fell back to 6. Also, he went from 8 pressures in his rookie season to 42 in 2023, and then he fell back to 36 last year. So in the grand scheme, it seems like a little bit of a step back year for Boye Mafe from a pass rush perspective. He did improve considerably as a run defender. This is something that Mike McDonald and others talked about, that he really improved his run defense, and that showed up in his PFF grade. He had a 61 grade for run defense in 2023. That rose all the way to 77.8 in 2024. So a big jump there in terms of how he performed as a run defender. And if we look at which of the edge defenders were the best run defenders, obviously edge is going to be primarily about pass rush, or at least that's the thing that's really going to be focused on. Boye Mafe was he was 12th in the NFL among all edge rushers in run defense. He was literally like neck and neck with Myles Garrett. He was ahead of Will Anderson. He was right there with Jared Verse, Nick Bosa. He was right around those guys. So one of the best run defenders on the edge last year. So it's nice to see that he had some progress in one area. And my general feel with Boye Mafe is he had taken a big step. I remember watching a Brian Baldinger breakdown of Boye Mafe of just like, this guy is going to be a handful this year. And then he got hurt, and I just don't know that he ever fully recovered from that last year. So that's something I'm going to ask him about next time I get a chance to talk to him. But it does feel like Boye Mafe, from a athletic perspective, has maybe some of the best overall tools to take that step. Derick Hall. Let's talk about Derick Hall. Derick Hall went from 0 sacks in his rookie season to 8 last year. He went from 11 pressures to 45. It is a massive, massive leap in the quality of player that he became. Now, if you look at PFF, his run defense was really poorly graded. Now, I remember clearly a lot of plays where Derick Hall just blew up blockers on the edge and played with enough physicality that Coach McDonald was asked about some of those plays, in the post game. So it's not that Derick Hall is unwilling or doesn't have the tools, but there's still likely some nuances to run defense on the edge that are important for him to learn. He was pretty consistent through the year. He had 4 pressures in week 1. He had 6 pressures in week 3. He had, let's count them up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 games where he had at least 4 pressures. He had 7, 8, 9 games where he had at least 3 pressures. He did not have any of these like dominant 9, 10, 11 pressure kind of games. He did have more sacks early in the year. He had, through 5 weeks of the season, he had 5 sacks, and he ended with 8. So he had 3, obviously, in the final 12 games. And you'd want to see more production there. We saw some really impressive physical plays. The play he made against Jared Goff, the sack there where he just dragged him down by his nameplate, it was an incredibly physical play. I think Derick Hall is a power player, and I think that showed up last year really more than it had, certainly more than it had as a rookie. And if you look at the Seahawks defense overall from a pressure perspective, the top two players in terms of creating pressure were Leonard Williams with 55 and Jarran Reed with 48. You surprised? Jarran Reed, number 2 on the team in pressures. It's true. 48 pressures. Boye Mafe was 3rd with 47. And then Derick Hall was 4th with 45. But here's the thing. Draymond Jones, as much as people had negative things to say about Draymond Jones, he also had 45 pressures. That is a lot of pass rush that walked out the door for the Seahawks that they're going to have to get somewhere else. And you're hoping that part of the solution for how they get that is a healthy Uchenna Nwosu. Uchenna Nwosu had 62 pressures in 2022 when he signed and last played a full season with the Seahawks. He played 952 snaps that year. He has not played more than 280 since. And the truth of the matter with Uchenna Nwosu is he's only had 2 seasons where he's played more than 700 snaps out of his 7 seasons in the NFL. But he has had, a 62, those 2 seasons, he had 62 pressures and 41 pressures. And having a guy like that get back into the mix would be pretty helpful. We don't know what his situation is other than he's had a cleanup surgery and they expect him back, but they don't know. We don't know when. We don't know if he's going to start training camp or he's going to start the season on PUP. We don't know any of that yet. So he's one part of the puzzle. Another part of it is DeMarcus Lawrence. And DeMarcus Lawrence is a guy that the Seahawks added in free agency, and he's 33, so he's not getting any younger. He only played 4 games last year. In those 4 games, he had 9 pressures. Granted, 7 of them came in the first game, so almost all of them came in that first game. But he had some decent production, 3 sacks in 4 games. Some of those sacks were, not necessarily the most impressive sacks you'll see in terms of guys like long running plays, a guy runs into him, that kind of thing. But it did happen. It's worth calling out that the last, not full season, but the last time he played significant snaps in 2023, he had 647 snaps. 2022, he had 787 snaps. In those 2 seasons, he had 48 pressures and 59 pressures. If you can get the version of DeMarcus Lawrence that's going to get you between 40 and 50 pressures, that's honestly pretty high above what my expectation would be for him at 33. But if he can do that, that would be huge. And that would really essentially replace the Draymond Jones production. And I think in some ways upgrade it, because while DeMarcus Lawrence is probably not the pass rusher, or definitely is not the pass rusher he once was, where he was getting 13, 15 sacks in a season, he is one of the preeminent run defenders, and Draymond Jones was not. So I think, he can be an upgrade in that regard, certainly from a physicality and also from potentially a leadership perspective. There was a time where Seattle had these veteran, well-accomplished, well-respected players on the defensive line. And when you had a rookie come in, like, let's say, a Frank Clark, that person could learn from some of the vets. And I think that Boye Mafe and Derick Hall, they didn't have a vet really in the room last year. They were just learning from the coaches and from each other. Having a healthy Uchenna Nwosu, having DeMarcus Lawrence, that could be a big boost to them in terms of how they're practicing, how they're prepping, any tips, any things that they could learn. So that's one thing to keep in mind. I see that someone's talking about ads. I want to just take a quick in the chat. I love when YouTube won't work because there's incessant ads that won't load. That's my favorite thing. Well, I'm sorry that's happening. couple things I'll just offer there for people that don't love the ads. One, YouTube Premium will get you out of all ads. I'm a YouTube Premium subscriber. It was one of the best things I did. I definitely enjoy watching things on YouTube without the ads. That would include this show. Also, you can get ad-free audio of this show if you ever want to listen to that, just by going to patreon.com/hawkblogger, signing up there. Ad-free audio is posted every day. So if you want to get out of the ad world, those are two options that could help. So that is DeMarcus Lawrence. That is Uchenna Nwosu. That is Boye Mafe and Derick Hall. There's a couple other things I wanted to bring up about this. So if I look at pressure rate, and this is from NFL, not from PFF. So Boye Mafe had a 12.6% pressure rate in 2023. And that, by their count, had 53 pressures. In 2024, what's going on? Why didn't that work? Gonna have to reload. Give me a second. So this is using the NFL's data. So in 2024, that went from 12.6 pressure rate to 12. He basically was the same player from a pressure rate perspective. His pressures went from 53 to 37, according to the NFL. But if you look at Derick Hall, Derick Hall went from a 7.5% pressure rate in 2023 to a 14.4% pressure rate. He doubled his pressure rate in 2024. And, again, I kind of at that point, what I wanted to start looking at, and I'm going to share with you now, was what are some examples of other players, edge rushers, who have maybe had a slower rookie season and then developed into something more interesting, and what came of those players. I've got some interesting names to share with you. Some are a stroll down memory lane. Some of them are pretty interesting relative to the current Seahawks. Before I get to those, I got a couple super chats. Let me get those up here. Gingerbread Man says, from year 1 through year 3, where's Mafe's snap counts? Any different or time on the field? So Boye Mafe, his snap counts, he was 452 snaps as a rookie, 808 snaps in 2023, and then 607 in 2024. So good to point that out, in that's 200 fewer snaps and 11 fewer pressures, at least by PFF's counting. That's why the pressure rate was something I wanted to call out, that roughly he had the same pressure rate in 2024 that he had in 2023, but he did have fewer snaps. And so you're going to have fewer pressures. And I think that's a good thing to point out. Appreciate it. Backdoor Savage. Oh my gosh. Did I just say that out loud? Okay. Do you think Trey Hendrickson is on the table? To me, he comes in and gives us a chance to be dominant. I don't think that Trey Hendrickson is on the table. I don't think it makes sense to bring in another over 30 pass rusher. I don't think it makes sense to sign over 30 pass rushers to like very large contracts, which is what he wants. I think you're going to regret that. I think it has a chance of being something that maybe you benefit from in year 1, but I don't think it's going to be something that you benefit from long term. So I think it would be a bad move, personally. If the Seahawks were everything, like let's say that you had proven out Sam Darnold, you'd proven out Clint Kubiak, the offense was humming, the defense was doing everything right, but you needed like that one guy that could be your ace in the hole in the playoffs, then maybe. But I don't think the Seahawks are going to want to block Boye Mafe and Derick Hall from getting more snaps. And honestly, they could have done something in the draft. There are a lot of edge rushers that some people liked. They could have potentially gone after someone in free agency or one of these trades. They didn't do that. I think that they're more comfortable with their edge room than maybe some of us are. All right. Next, Zach Schwartz says, thanks for having a normal name, Zach. Appreciate you. What non-defensive lineman edge do you think will have the most sacks? Which non-defensive lineman edge player? So that's getting into off-ball linebackers and cornerbacks and safeties. It's kind of an obscure question, I got to admit. Ernest Jones would be a good guess on that. Ernest Jones has had some pretty remarkable seasons as a pass rusher. And even last year, I was looking at this. Where is this? If you look at Ernest Jones, when he was lined up, they lined him up as a edge a few times last year. He had 11 snaps as an edge rusher last year, and he had a 20% pressure rate. So that's pretty good. It looks actually like, so he only had 5 pass rushes as an edge player last year, but 1 out of those 5 turned into a pressure. If you look at his overall pressure rate, in 86 pass rushes, he had 13 pressures, which is a 15% pressure rate. Again, I think he's a guy that, he only had a half a sack last year. But if you go back to, what was it, 2021? 2021? Maybe it's 2022. No, it must have been 2021. Sorry, my bad. So he had a 18% pressure rate that year, and there's some season that I'm missing here, because he had a bunch of. Oh, it was 2023. There it is. Thank you. Sorry, I was searching around for it. He had 132 pass rush snaps in 2023. He had 4.5 sacks, 29 pressures, 22% pressure rate. So Ernest Jones is a guy that has is a sneaky good blitzer and can be used in that way. I also see folks talking about 20,000 subscribers. We are getting very close. Sea Lord of Bravo says we are drawing near to 20,000 subscribers. Where are we? Current count. We are about 80 subscribers away from 20,000. So would love to add you to the YouTube subscriber list if you haven't already done it. All right. So I teased it. I'm going to share it. So I went to start looking at players who had maybe Derick Hall or Boye Mafe like starts, where they started off with not a lot of sacks as rookies, and then they maybe grew into it as their career went on in their second season. This is an imperfect process. This is not an exhaustive list. I just sampled a few, and this came from a search I did that was finding players that had at least 8 sacks in their second season, and that came up with 164 players. So I'm not going to obviously go through all of those, but I went through those players and started looking at, okay, of those players, which of them had slow starts? Who was a guy that had 0 sacks as a rookie and then had 8 sacks in his second year? He happens to have just signed with the Seahawks this offseason. His name's DeMarcus Lawrence. DeMarcus Lawrence in 2014 had 0 sacks. He had, and I can look this up because I've got it open here. He had 14 pressures, 0 sacks. And his second year, he had 8 sacks and 46 pressures. So pretty much the exact duplicate of what Derick Hall had. I'm not going to have the pressure numbers for all these guys I'm going to talk about. I'm mostly going to talk about sacks, as imperfect as that might be. The reason I'm talking about these guys is just see, okay, so what happened with them? Well, DeMarcus Lawrence dropped down to 1 sack in his third year. And then in his fourth year, 14.5, his fifth year, 10.5. And then he dropped down and has not had more than 6.5 sacks since that time. So sacks are this kind of imperfect stat where the reason people like pressures more, they're more predictive. They're more like pressures are a more stable metric to follow because there's lots of reasons a sack might not come your way. You might actually pressure somebody into somebody else, like to step up into a sack for somebody else. That still is a disruption that matters. But in any event, I think it's worth, sacks are really important. And this is an example of somebody who, just like Derick Hall, started off with nothing, had 8. He took a step back. So it's not a straight linear path up, but he did recover and had some really good seasons. Another familiar name for Seahawks fans who started off a little slower and then came on was Frank Clark. Frank Clark had 3 sacks as a rookie. So not 0, but he had 3. And he had 10 in his second season. So he had a similar jump, 7 sack increase in his second season. In his third season, he had 9. In his fourth season, he had 13. In his fifth season, he had 8. So he's an example of someone who, once he kind of reached that level of production, he was able to sustain it for a good few years. It did drop off after that, by the way. Another name that Seahawks may see, depending on how his health is at the time this season, is Cameron Jordan. Cam Jordan started in 2011 as a 22-year-old rookie, and he had 1 sack in his first season. He had 8 sacks in his second season. Well, from there, it went 12.5, 7.5, 10, 7.5, 13, 12, 15.5, 7.5, 12.5, 8.5. He's been one of the best players in the NFL for a decade. And we could only be so lucky that Derick Hall or Boye Mafe has a career trajectory like that. At this point, Boye Mafe would not, because he went from, what did I say Boye Mafe had his rookie year? 3 sacks to 9 sacks to 6 sacks. So he has not had this sustained level necessarily that Cam Jordan did, but interesting there. Another name that should be familiar because of how well he played last year is Jonathan Greenard. He started as a rookie in 2020 for the Texans. He had 1 sack as a rookie. He had 8 sacks in his second season. But then in his third season, he got injured, played fewer games, and had 1.5 sacks. His fourth season, he went to 12.5. And last year with the Vikings, he had 12. So I think that's another promising story. By the way, not all of these are going to be promising. I'm just going through the list of guys that had kind of similar trajectories to start their careers. Marcus Golden is another one. He started for the Cardinals in 2015 as a 24-year-old rookie. He had 4 sacks in his first year. He had 12.5 in his second. So, a similar 8-sack jump, 8.5 in this case, as a rookie, and in his second season. Then in his third year, he only played 4 games. He was injured, so he had 0 sacks. His fourth season, he had 2.5. So he just had this kind of aberration year in his second season. Then he left as a free agent to the Giants, and he had 10 sacks there. Then 4.5, 1.5, 3. And then he came back to Arizona. He had 11 sacks. He's had a very weird career. So while he has been a somewhat productive pass rusher in 3 seasons, that's not exactly the career trajectory I think you're hoping for the Seahawks. Here's another name that doesn't quite fit, but I wanted to call it out because he's a Seahawk that old Seahawk fans will remember. His name is Jacob Green. And Jacob Green was a rookie for the Seahawks in 1980. He had 6 sacks as a rookie. He had 12 in his second season. So he had a big jump up there from 6 to 12. He then got injured in his third season, he only played 9 games, so he went down to 3. But from there, 16 sacks, 13 sacks, 13.5, 12, 9.5, 9, 3, and then 12.5 again. One of the most productive pass rushers in Seahawks history, finished his career with 115.5 sacks. So Again, you'd love to have something like that happen. Some other guys. I'm going to read you a few other guys just because I think it's interesting to kind of know like what are some other histories and which of these might be relevant. Richard Dent, the Hall of Fame level pass rusher for the Chicago Bears, started as a rookie in 1983 at 23 years old. He had 3 sacks as a rookie. His second year, 17 and a half. That is a massive jump. Then 17, then 11 and a half, 12 and a half, 10 and a half, 9, 12, 10 and a half, 8 and a half, 12 and a half. Richard Dent was a monster. I don't think that you can project anything like his career. To go from 3 sacks to 17 and a half sacks tells you something. And I don't think either of these guys made that kind of leap. Another famous player, Brian Cox for the Miami Dolphins, started in 1991 as a 23-year-old rookie. He had 2 sacks as a rookie. Then he went to 14 his second year. And then he dropped to 5, 3, 7.5, 3, 5, 6. So that's an example of a guy that kind of popped in his second year and then was essentially like a rotational mediocre player. Like he was a Pro Bowler 3 seasons. I remember him as being a pretty good player, but he was not that great. Some more recent examples that are worth being aware of. Kayvon Thibodeau had 4 sacks as a rookie in 2022. He had 11 and a half sacks his second season, and then he fell back to 5.5 last year. That's kind of the trajectory I worry about with Boye Mafe. Like they're similar in terms of kind of a athletic edge player. Kayvon Thibodeau is still a valuable player, but I do worry a little bit about that being a possible trajectory. Nick Bonito, who was drafted in the same season as Boye Mafe, 2022, a 23-year-old rookie. He had 1.5 sacks as a rookie, 8 his second season, and then jumped up to 13.5 in his third year when he made the Pro Bowl and was second team All-Pro, I believe. A couple other names I'll share with you. Vic Beasley is kind of a cautionary tale for the Falcons. He went from 4 sacks as a rookie to 15.5 his second year, then 5, 5, and 8 before washing out of the league. I think John Abraham. If you don't remember John Abraham, I think he's a really interesting comp for Derick Hall, to be honest. Like they play with similar power and ferocity. I loved John Abraham as a pass rusher for all those years. He started with the Jets, but I remember him mostly with the Falcons. He, in his rookie year, had 4.5 sacks. He went up to 13 his second season, then went down to 10, 6, 9.5, 10.5, 4, 10, 16.5, 5.5, 13, 9.5, 10, 11. I mean, this guy had 133.5 sacks over his career, multiple Pro Bowls, multiple All-Pros, just a ferocious pass rusher. And, that was a guy that does come to mind for me as a similar player to Derick Hall. The other thing that's I think important to kind of think about is Mike Macdonald and how he works with edge rushers and how he works with pass rush in general. I don't have access to unblocked pass rush, which is unblocked pressure rate, which is a really valuable way to assess defensive coordinators' ability to scheme open pass rush opportunities. The latest that I've got is only from week 6 up through week 6 in the 2024 season. The Seahawks ranked 4th in the NFL in unblocked pressure rate at that point, with a 24% unblocked pressure rate. The Dolphins, the Jets, and the Bears were ahead of them. The Browns were right behind them. But I think that's an important part of what Mike Macdonald can bring to this. And if you look at, let's look at, here we go. If you look at the Baltimore Ravens and you look at the years that Mike Macdonald was there, let's go back to 2023, which was the last year that Mike Macdonald coached there. People remember Jadeveon Clowney, Kyle Van Noy. He kind of took some veterans. He didn't have like dominant players there that put up huge numbers, but they did put up kind of their career best numbers. So a lot of the sack production was coming from the interior. It was coming from Justin Madubuike or Nnamdi Madubuike, I think now. But you had Jadeveon Clowney, Adafe Owe, Kyle Van Noy, and Tavius Robinson were the guys that got meaningful pass rush snaps on the edge. And Clowney had 71 pressures that year. Owe had 51 and Kyle Van Noy had 48. Their win rates were 17.5% for Clowney and 18.2% for Owe, 15% for Van Noy. If you go back to 2022 and we look at the edge rushers for Mike Macdonald in his first season as the coordinator for the Baltimore Ravens, you get it's thinking. You get Justin Houston, Owe, Tyus Bowser, and Jason Pierre-Paul. And none of those guys had more than 39 pressures. None of them had higher than a 14% win rate. So that was not like he did not get quality edge rush, but you also just see that he has not always prioritized that position. I mean, Clowney and Van Noy are kind of were veteran guys. You could call them almost journeymen, although they've had some quality to their careers. And I do wonder how much edge rush is going to factor into this for Mike Macdonald. I think that he's got big plans for Mafe and Hall. I think that they're going to be the featured players. I think DeMarcus Lawrence and Uchenna Nwosu are going to be rotational complementary players. I think that they will be guys primarily that they might use in run defending situations. Maybe base, like they might be listed, quote, as starters, but I'm not sure that they're actually going to get starter snap counts. My bet is that the snap counts at the end of the year will be Boye, Mafe, and Derick Hall leading as your edge rushers. And let's face it, if you look at the teams that are really making hay in the NFL playoffs, they're teams that have excellent edge rush, excellent ability to affect the quarterback, in these big moments. That's how Josh Sweat got the contract he got from Arizona. That's how the Eagles really beat the Chiefs last year and just caused chaos for Patrick Mahomes. And if we look at the teams that with players that had the most pressures last year. So Trey Hendrickson led the NFL in pressures with 83. He tied with Myles Garrett. Jonathan Greenard had 80. Jared Verse had 77. Jared Verse was a huge factor in the playoffs last year. And then you got Micah Parsons. Then you got Nick Bosa. Chase Young, interestingly, for New Orleans is up there with 66. Danielle Hunter was 66. Yaya Diaby for Tampa Bay had 65. Greg Russo for the Bills had 63. Josh Hines-Allen for the Jags, 63 as well. So did Zachary Smith who played for the Lions eventually. George Karlaftis for the Chiefs. And you kind of look and you keep going down, you got to keep going down all the way to 31st for where the Seahawks get their first guy to show up in Mafe and Hall. Mafe has 47, Hall had 45. So I think to really be a dominant edge player, you need to be up over 60 pressures. Ideally, if you really want to be in the elite class, you're over 70 pressures. There's only 5 guys in the NFL that were over 70 last year. That was Hendrickson, Myles Garrett, Jonathan Greenard, Jared Verse, and Micah Parsons. Nick Bosa was right below at 69. So if you want to call it 6. And I honestly think that that's probably your 6 most dominant pass rushers right now in the NFL, or at least well into the conversation for that. I think you got to see one of like Boye Mafe to me is the guy that has the most likely path to being one of those kinds of players. But Derick Hall, man, he is so powerful. And if he can just continue to develop and continue to work, I think this guy can be a 10 to 12 sack a year kind of player because power just doesn't take days off. Speed, like a lot of NFL linemen, if your like primary move is speed, they're good enough athletes now that they're able to account for that. But power, that comes to play every single snap. And so I like Derick Hall's tools in that regard to be a little bit more consistent, but I feel like Mafe might have a higher, peak that he can reach. We'll find out. We will find out. All right. So with that, I'm going to have an announcement probably coming out maybe today, probably tomorrow. If you've been wondering about what's going on with the Seahawks ticket registry that I ran last year, whether I'm going to do it this year, I'm going to have some news for you on that soon. And looking forward to talking to you all about it. I will say right now, this is as good a time as any to join as a Patreon member at patreon.com/hawkblogger. That gets you access to the Discord channel, and it's going to get access to other perks over time. So make sure you're signed up there. If you're a YouTube member, club level or higher, that also gets you access to the Discord channel. That will also get additional perks over time. So now's a great time to sign up. Always appreciate your support. And sign up as a subscriber on YouTube. We're just like 80 people away from 20,000 subscribers. Would love to have you with us on the journey. So last thing, we are planning to do a Real Hawk Talk tonight, a Thursday night Real Hawk Talk. I will let you know if and when that ends up happening. The plan is for that probably at 6 o'clock, but I got to check in with Nathan Ernst, Jeff Simmons, who are supposed to be doing that one. So keep an eye out on that. We will answer some of your Patreon questions and talk about some other stuff. That'll be fun tonight, assuming that we get to do that. All right, everybody, that will do it for today. I'm Brian Nemhauser. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Thursday. This has been another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. Take care.